Well, good evening, everybody. Welcome to this Fire Safety Essentials webinar on behalf of the Olinda Brigade. My name is John Schäuble. I'm a presenter of fire safety information for CFA. I'm also a local resident, so I live in Ferny Creek, and I've been the captain of the Sassafras Ferny Creek Fire Brigade, and also I've been a CFA volunteer for a very long time, more than 35 years. So pretty familiar with this part of the world, and that's important because that will help us to understand a little bit about what we're talking about tonight. So I'd also like to welcome my partner in crime, Taryn Campbell, who's going to sit in the background and push the buttons and steer the ship. Tonight also, could I welcome Phil Skiller, the captain of the Olinda Fire Brigade, and he'll have a couple of words to say towards the end of the webinar tonight, and also Alyssa Jans, who's the Community Engagement Officer at Olinda. And thank you to both of you for facilitating this meeting and encouraging us to conduct one. Right, okay, so before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge the Wurundjeri people, who are the traditional owners of the land on which we're meeting. I pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging, and also to any Aboriginal elders of other communities who might be with us tonight. So there's a couple of things. This is a webinar, and so it's not like a normal Zoom meeting. So I can't see you. You can see me, but I can't see you. You can participate. It's not entirely about a one-way thing. So you can participate by using the chat function. So if you look down the bottom, there's a little icon with chat, and you can either chat directly with me and Taryn, or you can chat to the whole group. So there's a little drop-down box there that enables you to do that. I need to let you know that we will be recording this session, so it'll only be used, and the only thing that's recorded will be me talking and the presentation itself. So you know, again, it's from your point of view, it's an anonymous participation, and that's fine. I'll be showing you a couple of animations tonight, so it won't be death by PowerPoint is what I'm trying to say. A couple of animations, there's a short video as well, and as we can see there, we can use the chat function to ask questions and answer questions. And if you need any help, you can just select all panelists. Okay, so we might just have a little practice at chatting. I can see someone's already had a bit of a practice chat there, but could you just stick in the chat where you're joining us from tonight? So you're joining from Olinda or Sassafras or Monbulk or wherever it is. So we'll just let that run for a little bit. Fabulous. So I can see people there, quite a few people from Olinda, someone from Belgrave Heights, we've got someone from Ferny Creek, Mount Dandenong, Kallarama, Belgrave, Sassy, someone from Preston, Mount Evelyn, Wonthaggi, and Montrose. So a nice spread of people joining from all over the place, but predominantly about the ridgetop area of the Dandenongs, and that's great because that's the part of town we're going to be talking about mostly tonight. Okay. Well, we might have a practice of the poll function. Oh, Taryn's ahead of me there. So this is a quick function. All you need to do is click on the answers here, and that'll tell us a little bit about who's with us tonight. So how long have you lived in the area? How would you rate your knowledge around fire safety? So we'll just give it a minute or so. So we're going to use this a little bit tonight to get some responses from you and to enable you to participate in the presentation a bit more. So what are we seeing there? We'll give it another, I don't know, 20 seconds. Okay, that's probably good enough, Taryn. Right, so we've got, again, a spread of people. So about 45% of people have lived here for more than 10 years. 5 to 10 years next group, and in the 1 to 5 years there's a good spread there. So there's 50, 40, 50% of people. So half of the people here have lived in the hills for not a very long time, if you use my measure, which is like about 60 years. So 1 to 5 years, and that's great because, you know, it's important that you know, thanks very much for attending. And also it's important for you because you'll have to come to some understanding about the sorts of risks we face living up here. And in terms of knowledge around bushfire, so people are reasonably confident about their knowledge about fire. So 30, you know, what do we got there? 40, 50, 60% have medium to high knowledge, but there's a good chunk of people attending who rate their knowledge around fire as sort of very low or low. So that's good also. And have you been to a CFA meeting before? So 2/3, 1/3, and that's great. Also to have a whole bunch of people who haven't been to a meeting here coming along and listening to what we've got to say. Okay. Righto, so what are we going to talk about tonight? The learning outcomes we're trying to achieve tonight is to understand a little bit about local fire risks, what to expect from a bushfire in the area, how do you know if there is a fire in the area, a little bit about planning and decision making, and also finally some survival, you know, tactics if your plan fails or you get caught out. So you know, you'll hear us talking a lot about planning tonight because, you know, one of the things that's been discovered over the years is people who have a plan of action ahead of a fire occurring, their survival rate's fantastic. If you don't have a plan, that's when you get in a bit of trouble. So we'll go into some of those issues. So I think the first thing we'll talk about is a little bit about understanding local fire risks. Thanks. And so, you know, Victoria, we know, is one of the most bushfire prone parts of the world, and there's just on that slide there's a series of photos of different sort of fire landscapes, and essentially, you know, fires occur all over our state. They occur in different ways and depending on where you are. So obviously in this part of the world we're in a heavily forested area. Fires behave in a certain way. You know, you go into coastal areas, different sorts of vegetation, different ways the fire moves. You go into farming areas and the fire moves very quickly through that sort of open landscape. Mountain areas down in the bottom there, you know, again, behaving in different and sometimes quite difficult ways because they're hard to access. And so it's important we understand this, because particularly this year, because I reckon a lot of people are going to be taking their holidays in different parts of Victoria rather than travelling overseas or interstate. So there'll be a lot of movement around Victoria. If we think back to last summer, there, you know, some of the issues that arose in the fires in particularly in East Gippsland, but also in the northeast, was that there are a lot of people travelling, and so they're out of their normal area. They're not as familiar with the place they're in. So it's important you have some basic understandings about bushfires and how they behave, no matter where you are in the state or in other parts of Australia. So this slide here talks about the different areas and regions, and they're important because those areas, which are in fact the total fireband districts or the fireband districts, also reflect the weather districts. So they're based very closely on the fire weather districts, and so you can see that we're in the central area, but the central area covers quite a lot of turf. It ranges from Ballarat all the way across to sort of Matlock and south to Wonthaggi. So, you know, it's a large area, and it's not always, the fire conditions are not always the same even in that sort of space area, but as you can see, you know, there are other parts of the state, and the forecasts and the fire weather forecasts and the general weather forecasts are based around these areas. And so, for example, at the moment up in the Mallee and the Wimmera, it's already started to dry out. So there's been some total fireband imposed up there already because their fire season's already started, whereas ours is not quite there yet. So we want to talk a little bit about seasonal outlook. Just a couple of maps there. On the left-hand side of the screen is the chance of exceeding the mean or the medium maximum temperature for December to February. and the redder it is, the higher the chance of it exceeding. Don't get too stressed about that one, because that's essentially saying the temperature will be a little bit higher than average. Doesn't mean it's going to be 10 degrees higher or 4 degrees higher or even 3 degrees higher. It might only be half a degree. But it's an indicator that the temperature is going to be a little bit hotter than it has been in the past, and so that's one thing we need to take into consideration. On the right-hand side of the screen is the chance of exceeding the median rainfall, and that's a bit more important and a bit more exciting from our point of view, and we'll talk a little bit more about rainfall in a second. But you can see the bluer it gets, the higher the chance. Up in the tropics, they have an 80% chance it's going to be wetter than normal. And in fact, they've already had, I heard tonight on the news, a big dump of rain up in the northwest part of the country, a couple of 100 mils in the past 48 hours. So it's going to be wetter. So wetter, but hotter. And we're in the middle of a La Nina event. And that's what the meteorologists are telling us. And even in our little bit down in the corner there, in the bottom corner of the screen, you can see the Victoria, and our part of Victoria is going to be, there's a chance that we have higher than normal rainfall. So there's a bit of good news here. We'll talk a bit more about rainfall in a minute, but one of the things that happens, we've had quite a lot, and so things like the soil moisture in the Upper Yarra catchment area is 100%. So that's good news. What it means overall, those two slides are telling us, is it's going to be a shorter fire season than we certainly had last year. You think back to last year, this time last year, large chunks of the state were already on fire, and the prospect of more bits of it catching fire was certainly there, and we saw that play out. In fact, large parts of the country are on fire by this time last year. We think back to last year, the first fire restrictions came in East Gippsland in September. So, the fire restrictions coming in East Gippsland next week. So, it's running much more to a normal sort of pattern this year. In fact, a little bit later than normal, and that's fantastic. What it doesn't mean is what it does not mean is that we're not going to have fires. So there'll be fires somewhere this year, and so the areas we're looking at are slightly different. I just want to talk quickly about rainfall. I know, on the Olinda Facebook page that those sort of scary maps of the grassland curing are put up pretty regularly, and that just shows that the dryness, that's one thing. It's one indicator of dryness in the landscape. And if you look at the maps for this year, it's a little less dry than it was last year, so that's good. But the thing that really affects our seasons here, the most dominant seasonal impact, is rainfall. So if you look at that map, that's the rain period from January to November this year, and you can see that big blob of very much higher than average rainfall sort of hovering over the Dandenongs and West Gippsland there. So we've had much higher rainfall than normal. So the average rainfall in the hills is about 1,200 millimetres a year, and that's based on long range records from Mount Dandenong. The recording now is done at Ferny Creek, so they've just moved the weather station a bit, but essentially they're very similar. And so this year to date, we've had 1,543 mils up to the end of November. We've had another 45 already this month, so we'll tip over 1,600 mils of rain this year, which is terrific. And what that means is that it takes a long time for that to dry out, and so this part of the world, our fire season normally starts a little bit later than other parts of Victoria, but this year it'll start even later, so that's great. You really have to go back to the 1950s to see those sorts of figures on a regular basis. So back in the mid 1950s and up to about 1960, we had that sort of level of rainfall consistently. The last time we had anything near this was 1996, and if you're a local, you remember what happened after 1996 was 1997, and in 1997 we had quite severe fires in the hills. So it's not an absolute guarantee that there'll be no fires. You really, you're looking for 3 or 4 hot days, strong winds, northerly winds, and it can tip it very quickly depending on the fuel loads and the precise location. But this year is good. I mean, this year, I'm pretty comfortable with where we're at the moment. In fact, I'm very comfortable. We had some big monthly rainfall. So you look at there at April, 272 mils. That's fabulous. The 1 month where we fell a little bit lower than normal, it was only about an inch less than normal, was September, which was fantastic if you lived here, because that was when all the gardens were in full bloom and we got to enjoy a fabulous spring. Okay, so this year, you know, in a statewide sense, the areas that are of concern are down there in the southwest. So the grass, because, you know, you get this much rain and these sorts of conditions, you get fantastic grass growth. And so down in the western districts, you know, there's fabulous grass. There's pretty good grass everywhere. There's lots of hay being baled all over the place. And the other place that will be of concern going into the next little bit will be East Gippsland, because even though there was a lot of fire in East Gippsland last year, there's an underlying dryness out there. So, you know, it takes a few years for the rain to build that back into the soil. So there are still large chunks of Gippsland that haven't burnt. So I don't think, because there were big fires there last year, it's not going to happen again this year. There's still lots of places that can burn. So they're the two really tricky parts for this year. But as I say, if you think back to last summer, we had a good summer in the hills. We had pretty heavy rainfall in January and February, and we're going into this summer with the, you know, the high total that's up there on the slide. So that's one of the things that affects us. The next thing that affects us is vegetation. Thanks, Taryn. Thank you. So let's talk a little bit about the sort of vegetation we have in the Dandenongs. And so these are photos from the local area. And if you look at the photo and it's one big photo on the left-hand side there, that's the sort of vegetation you see on the western face of the Dandenongs. So that's the bit of the Dandenongs that looks out over the city. You know, it's a mixed species forest. There's a fair bit of mountain grey gum. There's a couple of varieties of stringy bark. There's some peppermint. There's a bit of manna gum, and the understory is a sort of dry, scrubby stuff. It sits there facing the western part of or facing west, and so all summer long the sun beats down on that side. The wind prevails from that direction, so it's the bit that dries out. And historically, a lot of our fires have come from that direction. Some of the trees in that forest have got, you know, there's a couple of species of stringy bark, so messmates. They have a sort of fibrous bark, and so that fire will run up them quite easily. And so they'll travel quite quickly from the ground up to the treetops, and so in the right conditions we'll get crown fires running up the side of the hill. So that's something to be aware of. If you look on the other side at the photo at the top there, that's a bit of mountain ash forest. So if you think about the Dandenongs and you think about Mount Dandenong Tourist Road, that divides the two basic sorts of forest. And so one side's a dry forest, the other side's a wet forest. And so, you know, mountain ash forest is a single species forest, understory of ferns, sassafras, much damper. It tends to be on the southerly side of the hills. And if you want to see this, see the transition, if you go up to Ridge Road and along Ridge Road, and there's a couple of reserves up there, you can actually see how the forest transitions from one side to the next. And so that's our local vegetation. It will all burn. Don't worry about that. But you know, the northwestern facing side tends to burn more readily than the southerly facing side. You know, and then we have these intersections of private land, public land, and you can see a little example of that in the bottom corner. So I guess the message from this is, because the third factor that impacts local risks is topography, and we'll talk about that in a tick a little bit more, but essentially we're talking about fires that will travel from the bottom of the Dandenong, so you know, the basin, Montrose, up to the top of the Dandenongs in just a few minutes. And so within 10 or 15 minutes, historically, we know this from past fires, is that due to spotting and direct run of fire, we can have properties at the top of the hills under threat really quickly. Okay, the message of that is that there's not much time here. I mean, this is not like other parts of the state, because once the fire starts at the bottom of the hill, it's going to be at the top very quickly. You don't have a lot of time to do anything at that point. So let's have a talk about local risks. And one of the things we know about fires in the Dandenongs is that one of the things we know about them is that we do know quite a bit about them, because there's been several of them over the years. This has always historically been quite a busy fire part of the state, and so there's been, you know, there's a history of fires in the Dandenongs, and that's pretty well known. So if you look at the photos there on the top left-hand corner is a picture of what we call the western face, and so the sky highs at Mount Dandenong is marked there. And you know, while it looks like a very sort of tiny strip of bush between the sort of Sheffield Road farmlet area and the top of the hills, it's about, in linear terms, probably 700 or 800 meters, but it's like that. It's like on a 30-degree slope. So and the second photo sort of shows a bit about the slope. So the fire will whip up there in no uncertain terms. I mentioned 1997 before. So the photo on the top right-hand side of the screen there is probably the fires at the peak of their activity in 1997, which is the last time there were significant fires in the Ridge area. And that was, you know, as I said before, after just 3 or 4 days of hot weather, strong winds dried things out. It wasn't particularly, the landscape itself wasn't particularly dry, but it was dry enough to sustain fire. And we had 4 or 5 fires that day. Lost nearly 50 houses, so 47 houses, and 3 people were tragically killed. So amongst the other local risks we need to talk about are some of just looking at those photos. One is sort of narrow access tracks. The second, another thing is that little pockets of settlement deep in the bush, so quite isolated in the bush. And so, you know, the nature of settlement up here is sort of a little bit different to other parts, because if you look at the slide of Mount Dandenong there, you can see that we have these little pockets of settlement at the top of the ridge or just below the ridge, and that can be quite a difficult position in terms of fire danger. But basically we're living on top of a mountain in the middle of the forest. So in bushfire terms, that's not a great thing. Oh, we've started a poll. Okay, so why don't we jump in there and answer this. So what are some of the things that contribute to the area being of high fire risk? So hop on there and have a bit of a go. So we've got some options: bushland, hills, long grass. That's good. We'll let that go for another 30 seconds. Okay, so quite a few responses there, and you can see the bushland is one of the things that contributes to the area being of high risk, and so that's for sure. So essentially anywhere where your house is within 700 meters of a substantial area of bush, you're at risk, mostly from ember attack rather than from direct flame attack. But so that's you know, that's important, and there's pretty much nowhere in the ridge area of the Dandenongs, at least, that's not within 700 meters of bush. And the closer you are to the bush, obviously, the more at risk your house is, particularly from embers. So, you know, it's a graded thing. The first 50 meters is the most dangerous, then the next 100 meters is, and so it pushes out. But even out to 700 meters, which is a fair distance, you're at risk of ember attack. So hills, one of the things that affects how fires spread is topography. So we know that fires go faster up hills than they do along the flat. And so for every 10 degrees that the slope increases, the speed of the fire will increase, will double in speed. So that's important. So topography is important. Long grass, significant, particularly in grassland areas, not such a big deal up here because we don't have a lot of big grassy areas. There's a few in Olinda, but probably more in Olinda than other parts of the hills. But so that's a factor. Narrow roads for sure, dead end streets, limited access and egress. So these are all factors that affect the spread of bushfire. So topography, fuel, limited access, all of these things will affect the speed of fire impact. And, you know, limited roads into and out of the area, vegetation up to the road edge, extreme winds, falling trees. So bushfires occur in generally pretty windy conditions. And we know from even when it's not on fire up here that you know, falling trees will block access and egress pretty quickly. It only takes one tree to block the road. So there aren't that many routes into and out of the Dandenongs. And it's pretty easy for us to lose a main arterial road with a single tree. And that can block. So, you know, I remember a few years ago, there was a tree came across one of the main roads during a high risk, or on a high risk day, and it basically blocked the road for the entire day. So just bear that in mind when you're thinking about what you do. We talked a little about transition of vegetation types and the different fire behaviour that occurs in them. There's a few other things that add to our local risks here. The mobile phone reception is pretty lousy. The introduction of the NBN means that your household phones in most cases will eventually simply be reliant on NBN. One of the things that happens is during bushfires, the power goes out. So you're likely to lose your landline connection as well. Other things just to chuck into the mix is this is a very popular tourist area. So we've got high levels of tourists, lots of people coming up to visit. There's a lot, you know, people bushwalking or cycling through the hills. And so that's just another risk factor. And there's pretty limited public transport to get in and out if you need to use that. So what does it all mean? It means that, you know, we're probably going to have traffic congestion. We're likely to have loss of road access. As I said, the power is highly likely to go out. We might lose water because the water supply is, you know, there's mains water in the Dandenongs, but it's basically a single main that runs up from Sylvan and runs either down this way towards Ferny Creek or the other way towards Montrose. If that, for whatever reason, is interrupted, then you lose pretty much water across the hills. And one of the things we know from past experiences, when there is a fire, people will turn their taps on and the water pressure will go down. So you need to be aware of that. Loss of mobile phone and so, generally a bit of community panic. And we've seen a couple of examples of that in recent years. So let's talk about Olinda and your brigade. So in Olinda, you've got a fantastic and really committed CFA brigade who work 24/7 to keep you all safe. Thanks, Tara. We'll go to the next slide. We have to look realistically at the figures, and it was there a second ago. But essentially in Olinda, we've got some technical issues here. Okay. Oh, we're back again. Olinda's brigade, sorry about that, is so in Olinda and the community, you've got around 1,100 homes. That's about right. So that's Olinda and a bit of Mount Dandenong. So that's about 1,100 people. Your population's around 2,900. That's based on you know, 2.5 people per household. So that's roughly about right also. And you've got 3 fire trucks. So in terms of, can you expect during a bushfire to get a fire truck at your house? The numbers don't quite stack up. And in fact, you know, from a firefighting point of view, we're not necessarily going to try and save every house. We're not focused on your house or the next house or the house after that. Our strategy in those circumstances our objectives are strategic ones. So we're looking to stop the spread of the fire from one part of the hills to the other, rather than focusing on individual properties. So, you know, do you think it's realistic to expect a fire truck to turn up at your place? And the answer to that is simply no. And so you need to be thinking around what you do in those terms. You know, if it's an ordinary house fire like tonight, you'll get as many fire trucks as you like. But during a large bushfire, it's not going to happen. So, what do we expect from a fire? Let's have a bit of a chat about that. So, as we know, we have lots of bushfires in Victoria, and you know, it's one of the most fire-prone areas in the world. And we saw, you know, plenty of examples of that last summer. And I guess what we're seeing increasingly is more summers like, not entirely like last summer, but more summers in which we have quite a lot of fire activity. And so that's an indication that times are changing. But the photos and the pictures of those are all over the TV and on social media. And that's how most people experience fire. Most people never actually experience a bushfire in their lives, even in places like the Dandenongs. So people who live here can live here, you know, the entire duration of their living experience in the Dandenongs, and they'll never see a bushfire because, you know, it's a relatively rare event. It's not like car accidents. So most people have seen a car accident, been in a car accident, you know someone who's been in a car accident. Bushfires are different. They're not as readily experienced as that, although in places like this, we probably see more of it and need to be more prepared for it than in other parts. So there's two aspects of bushfire that are really important to understand. The first is ember attack. And so I'm going to get Tara now to show you this animation. And that'll give you some sense of ember attack.
During a bushfire, embers will reach your home long before the flames do. Ember attacks are the most common way that houses catch fire. Embers are burning leaves, twigs, and pieces of bark. They help the bushfire spread by starting spot fires ahead of the main fire front. Short-distance ember attacks happen when leaves and small pieces of bark are blown from burning trees. The intense shower of sparks that forms fills the air with hot, burning embers, which will land on nearby vegetation and properties. The hot embers can easily land and get into your clothes and burn your skin, eyes, and airways. Small fires will start all around you and quickly become uncontrollable. The resulting chaos creates confusion as the fire seems to come from many directions. It will be difficult to make good decisions about your safety. The experience will be physically exhausting and emotionally traumatic. Long-distance ember attack is caused by large bushfires that generate intense heat. As the hot air rises, it forms a column of smoke that sucks in air like a vacuum.
Sorry, John, has that paused from your end?
No. So, oh, sorry, it has actually stopped at my end. So, so we might have to abandon that, Taryn, I reckon, because it's just staggering through.
Yeah, sorry about that. I think
okay.
there's...
So, sorry about that technical difficulties. This is the wonders of technology, of course. But you get the general idea, particularly from the start of that video, that ember attack is really the largest cause of property loss in places like the Dandenongs, and in fact in most during most bushfires. Pretty much, as I said, everywhere in Olinda is subject to ember attack, and it's much more of a risk to most properties than direct flame attack, or the house next door catching fire and your house catching fire from the radiant heat. So the second part that you didn't see so well in that video talks about the building up of that convection column, and that sucks up a lot of the heat and burning material, and can dump it like a kilometre away, or 2 kilometres away, or 20 kilometres away. So embers are something to keep an eye on. So Taryn, are we going to try radiant heat?
Yeah, we can give it a go. I've got a slightly dodgy internet connection, so
okay.
hopefully, if not, we can come back to them. So,
all right.
I might actually. Could you be able to play Radiant Heat, John, if you've got?
I can. Just hang on a second. Sorry about this, everybody. We're just obviously having a few. I'm sorry, Taryn, I haven't got it loaded on my computer, so.
That's right. I'll give it a go. Well, hopefully that it'll work for everyone.
Victoria is one of the most bushfire-prone parts of the world. Every summer, bushfires threaten properties and lives. But did you know it's not the flames that kill most bushfire victims? No, it's the radiant heat. Most victims die from the effects of radiant heat long before they're reached by the flames. Radiant heat is what you feel when you sit next to a campfire. If a campfire heats up to 2 kilowatts per square metre, you'll feel that it's too hot and will want to move back from the fire. If you don't, this amount of radiant heat is enough to cause burns and blisters in as little as 40 seconds. At 12 kilowatts, it can cause some materials like dry timber to ignite. A bushfire can reach 100 kilowatts, and the effects can be truly catastrophic. For humans, radiant heat can cause burns from 100 meters away and cause a dangerous increase in body temperature. Radiant heat can cause the rapid onset of heat stroke. Heat stroke damages your brain, meaning you won't be able to concentrate to make good decisions as the fire arrives. Other impacts include severe damage of internal organs and death. There are some things you can do if you're caught in a fire. Cover your skin with long-sleeved natural fibre clothing like wool. It's also useful to know that radiant heat only travels in straight lines and can't bend around corners. So, sheltering behind or inside solid structures may help protect you. But be aware, radiant heat will travel straight through glass. The best defense against radiant heat is a simple one. If you're not anywhere near a bushfire, its radiant heat can't hurt you. Leaving early is always your safest option.
Okay, so the point of that little animation there was to indicate that it's not actually, people don't get burnt to death, and there's a sort of myth that people burn to death during bushfires. What actually kills you during a bushfire is the impact of radiant heat, and so both the Ember attack video, which goes on to show people being trapped during a bushfire, and the radiant heat video, which illustrates why it's so dangerous to be there, what's behind the message that we now say people should leave early. If you don't need to be in a fire-prone area, then you should actually leave early, because that's the way in which your life will be saved. So the other thing about radiant heat is that it affects your ability to think clearly, and your decision making will be impaired. So radiant heat, we know, is the biggest killer in fire. Those photos there are just showing a couple of examples of what happens from radiant heat. So things melt, things catch fire, and it's not a good idea to be there. So the next little bit we're going to try and show you now is some comments that people have come up with. So after every major fire, CFA goes out and talks to members of the community about what it was like, and you can see that that's a reflection of people who've been through fires. It was like 5 minutes out there. Holy hell, it's just like you're in hell. I couldn't stand in front of the heat for more than 2 seconds. It's like a hailstorm of embers. It was like Lucifer going around us. So there's some relatively recent examples of people, or stories of people have been caught during fires. I'll never do that again video. So let's try and have a look at this one, Taryn. And these are just some quick stories from people who have been through the experience of being in a bushfire, and the experience. These are older examples, but the experience of people in the fires last summer was very similar. People who, here we go.
Ten years ago, when all the dams were full and the tanks were full and there was plenty of water, I probably would have stayed and I would have died.
Nothing went the way we might have anticipated.
Whatever preparations you put into place, you only need something small to go wrong.
In future, I don't think we'd want to put the kids through that sort of trauma, I guess. Yeah, wouldn't put the kids through that again.
If it was my choice, I wouldn't stay again. If we had another day like that, if I had the opportunity to get out, I would go before the fire even got here.
So that's a pretty consistent story from people who've been through bushfires. I remember talking to some people down Belgrave South who went through Ash Wednesday, and they said, we just never do that again. There were some people in and around Sarsfield this year, and that's been their story also, that to stay and defend unless you're completely and totally prepared for it, certainly is too awkward. The reality is, in the Dandenongs, we have the option of leaving early with relative simplicity. So it's not too far to go. It's not like we're driving from a remote rural town to a bigger centre. You pretty much can get out of the hills and into a safe area in a matter of 30 minutes. So the trick is not to try and do that too late. So leaving early means having a bit of a think about it. There'll be a number of days when it's just not a great idea to be up here. So on those days, it's about finding an activity that takes you off the hill. Okay, so what does it mean for you? It will be stressful and traumatic situation that you have to plan and be prepared for. Exit roads might be blocked. Ember attack causes fires to spread quickly. Radiant heat's the biggest killer. So your ability to make good decisions will be impacted by many factors. So let's do a quick poll. What do you think will be? What do you think would impact your ability to make good decisions? So just jump on there. We'll let that go for a minute or so, maybe 45 seconds even. So the sorts of things that are going to impact your ability to make good decisions will be stress, changing situations, things not going to plan, not having enough time, communications and heat. So we've got pretty good figures there. Alrighty. Okay, so most people are concerned about rapidly changing situations. One of the things about rapidly changing situations in this part of the world is it's not always easy to tell what's going on because we're not in an open area. You know, each little part of the Dandenongs is quite compact. And so one of the things that we've seen has happened in the past is that you get a lot of smoke and it's very hard to tell what's going on where, simply because of the amount of smoke we get in the environment. Stress is an issue. So, you know, we're all pre-stressed most of the time. So during a bushfire, your stress levels will certainly go up. Things not going to plan, not having enough time. Communication breakdown is a big thing. So we'll go on and talk a little bit about how to find out what's going on. But communication during a bushfire, it becomes difficult, and obviously heat is another factor. Okay. How do you know if there's a fire? So let's have a quick chat about fire danger ratings. And so so in the chat, can you just stick how do you think you would know, before we go to fire danger rating, can you just stick in the chat how you might know if there's a fire in the area? How do you reckon you'd know if there was a fire in the area? So let's have a bit of chatting. Okay, right. So we've got a few things here. Sirens, radio, Vic emergency app, 774, emergency app, smell the smoke. We'll come back to that. Town fire siren, Vic emergency app, Vic emergency. So there's some sirens. There's a good one. High wind, smoke sirens and helicopters, sirens, temperature, CFA signs. Okay. Smoke. And we'll go on to some of those in a second. But let's just go for the moment to fire danger ratings. Fire danger ratings are basically telling us something. They're not telling us that there's going to be a fire, or that there's they're not even telling us that there's a high risk of a fire. What these are telling us is that, and Taryn, you might want to run a poll here about what does the fire danger rating mean? So what does it mean? Is an indicator of how likely a fire will start. Is an indicator of how bad a fire would be if it were to start. Okay, we'll make this short and sharp, this one. Okay, coming up to ending the poll, just a couple more seconds. Okay, that's most people. So you're on the money. Fire danger rating is an indicator of how bad a fire would be if one were to start. It's not an indicator that fires are likely to start necessarily, but it's just an indicator of how bad a fire would become. And it's in fact telling firefighters how difficult it will be to contain that fire once it's begun. And so it's based on a calculation that looks at weather, wind, dryness in the environment, whether there's existing fire in the landscape, all those sorts of factors. Generally, once the fire danger rating hits the severe mark, that's about the point at which the total fire ban will be declared. So somewhere along this line here, they start thinking about declaring a total fire ban. Once we tip into the extreme and certainly into the code red area, that means the fires are basically uncontrollable. Code red actually would indicate that most houses are not built to withstand fires in those conditions. So they're important. It's just another little piece of information, but it's not telling you that there's going to be a fire or that there's one that's likely to start. It's simply telling you that this is how difficult it will be to contain fires if they do start. Does anyone know how many code red days have been in the central region? So we're in the central region in the past 5 years. Anyone want to have a guess at that? Okay. Okay, we'll let that go for another 10 seconds. All right. So the correct answer is there have been none. So there's certainly been some extreme days and some plenty of severe days, but there has not been a code red day in the central region in the past 5 years. In fact, there's never been a code red day in the central region. Not the last day that was anything like a code red day conditions was back in 2010. But in fact, we've never had one declared. There's only been one declared in the past 10 years, and that was last year, but it was for the North Country and Mallee parts of the state on the 21st of December last year. Alrighty. So once we hit these, certainly once you hit these ratings in the fire danger index, so severe, extreme, and code red, that's the point at which you need to be thinking about leaving early. And by leaving early, we mean leaving the area. And as I said earlier, it's pretty easy to leave the area up here for the day without too much drama, other than organising your pets and your children and all that sort of stuff. But it's a relatively easy task to leave early up here, and so that's why we encourage you to do that. Certainly when you're into extreme and code red. Code red's almost not negotiable. Extreme, you'd be well advised to be out of here. And on severe days, particularly if you've got kids, because when we think about some of the impacts of bushfires, the groups that are really severely affected in an emotional and psychological way are children and adolescents. Adolescents are one group that we tend to forget about, because it's sort of they're not thinking about it in terms of things that might happen. So it can actually be quite traumatic for them. So that's a decision you need to make for yourselves. But that would be my advice to you. Once you hit those sorts of levels, that's time to think about going. All right. So how do we find out what's going on? And you think about the sources of information we have these days compared to a few years ago. You'll start hearing information from all of these sources about anything. So, family, phone tree, Facebook, gossip, friends, local radio, YouTube, you name it. There's a whole lot of information swirling around. And this is a busy slide that reflects the sorts of sources of information that people get. Some of it's more reliable than other things, and a lot of it's just white noise. So how do we use this information to make decisions? You need to double check that the information you're hearing or reading is correct. And so things like Facebook are full of lots of information. Some of it's not always accurate. If you overheard something in a cafe or saw it on Facebook about a great business deal, you're likely to go and invest in it, or possibly not. And it's a bit the same with bushfire information. You need to check and double check. So we've got some sources of information that in bushfire terms are sound and pretty accurate. So the sorts of things we're talking about here are the local news, and one of the aspects of this is that you know, ABC 774 up here and some of the community radio stations act as emergency broadcasters, and so that is a good source of information. So having a radio on during the day is good. Vic emergency hotlines and other source of information. Online on EMV, agency social media. So if you're going to want to get information off Facebook, and that's the way in which you gather your information, go to the CFA agency site, or the CFA Twitter or CFA Facebook, and you can be assured that the information that's coming from the CFA rather than brigade. So local brigades are not in a position to offer you emergency information. Plenty of good information the rest of the time, but emergency information you need to go to CFA. So a lot of you identified the Vic Emergency app as an important source of information, and it's an ongoing thing, and so it provides you with updates about where incidents have started, and you can set your little, probably in our case, mostly a 5-kilometre radius. Otherwise, you're going to get information about fires all over the place. So Vic Emergency app's pretty good. National Relay Service for people who are hearing impaired or have some other disability that prevents them from using the normal channels. Interpreter service, and the final one down there in the corner is emergency alert. So that's a national telephone-based alerting service. It'll either ring you on your landline or ring you on your mobile phone. It'll often be just a single message saying that there's an emergency in your area. So you've got all of these formal means for alerting. A few people mentioned sirens. So up in this part of the hills, this is one of the few parts of the state where there are community alerting sirens. And so all of the brigades in the Dandenongs, their sirens will go off during an emergency, to dispatch the trucks, but they also operate as community alerting sirens. And so it's a different function. So once the emergency reaches a certain level, those sirens will go off for 5 minutes continuously, and that's just another piece of information that says there's something going on. You need to seek further information as to what's happening because there's an emergency about to impact on your area. So let's talk quickly about the advice, watch and act, and emergency warning. So, you know, these are the levels of advice that will come out through those channels. So one is an advice message that's simply telling you that there's an incident occurring in the area and you need to access information. So you need to go to one of those trusted sources and see and monitor what's going on. You can also, it can also use the advice message can also be used to say, well, you know, it's all clear now, so you don't have to worry anymore. So that's advice. Watch and act is an indication that an emergency is developing nearby and you need to take action now to protect yourself and others. So watch and act message, and the watch and act message might actually say you need to leave now, or you're advised to leave now. That's one of the possibilities in a watch and act message. And the final, or the third level, not the final, but the third level is an emergency warning. If an emergency warning is issued, it means you're in imminent danger and you will be impacted and you need to take action now. Generally, it indicates that it's actually too late to leave. If an emergency warning is issued, it'll indicate that the movement within the landscape is potentially dangerous. Particularly in the hills, up here in the ridge area, you might not get that nice sequence of advice, watch and act, and emergency warning. The first warning you get via one of the alerting systems might be an emergency warning. So you just need to understand what each of those levels means. We'll just flip to the next slide. There is the capacity to actually issue an evacuation warning. And we had some evacuation warnings issued last year, and it generally will be, in our case, if one was to go to an evacuation warning, it would happen well in advance of the fire impacting that particular part of the Dandenong. So again, go back to what I said right at the beginning, the time from impact to the top of from the bottom of the hill to the top of the hill in Olinda and along the ridge area is 20 minutes. So we're not likely to get an evacuation warning. And the final form of advice and messaging is a community information, and that will be simply an update message about what's gone on, generally issued after the event. The bottom line there is you don't wait for warning. So if we just go to the next one, you think about a fire starts, it takes, you know, maybe a couple of minutes to be reported to 000. So within 15 minutes, the advice message is released, because that information has got to be gathered up by the firefighters, sent back to the control center, advice messages formulated and released. You know, 30 minutes, updated to emergency warning, 45 minutes. As I said before, our impact in this part of the world is 15 minutes. So we're likely to be impacted before an advice message is even issued, or before an emergency warning is actually issued. So time is not on our side here. And that's why it's important that we think of other ways to gather information. And I always like to go back to this, because use your senses. So look, listen, and smell. So if you can smell smoke, find out what's going on. If you can hear sirens, whether they just be, you know, short bursts of sirens from fire trucks, or from the brigade being turned out, or from police cars, or whatever it is, that's another piece of information. And have a look, stick head out window and have a look and see what's going on. So often that's the first, these are the first signs we're going to get in the Dandenongs, in this part of the Dandenongs in particular, that something's going on. You need to be on those days of high risk, so the days when it's hot and dry and windy and it's a total fire ban, and you know the fire danger ratings up there in the sort of very high and severe. You need to be actively gathering information during the course of the day, not waiting for the phone to ring or for a text message to arrive. You need to be actually actively gathering this information, because it will determine your next actions. Okay, planning and decision making. So far we've talked about the risks in the area, what it would be like to experience a fire, ways to stay informed and know if there is a fire. Now I'm going to run us through a hypothetical situation, okay? So it's 8 a.m. on a Wednesday morning. You look outside and you can see it's already hot and windy. So we talked about, you know, hot northerly wind, temperatures already rising, even though it's early in the morning. Things are a bit crunchy underfoot. You walk out the back door and the bark and the leaves and stuff are already crunchy. So the morning news is reporting that today is a day of extreme fire danger. You get in your car and head off to work, right? So that's, or into town to do some shopping. You can see bits of leaves and branches and stuff falling, little branches falling down from the trees, and you can feel the heat coming through the window. So it's a hot day. It's a hot, windy, nasty day. It's about lunchtime and you hear people talking about a fire that started in Montrose. So you jump on the Vic Emergency app to find out whereabouts, and you see it started a short distance from your house. You get in the car, you start heading home to make sure that things are okay. You get closer to your home and you see the road's been blocked by the police. You wind down the window and they tell you that it's not safe to go into the area as the fire's still burning and the trees have come down on the road. So you will have to find somewhere else to go until the road's reopened. Now, I want to ask you a few questions here. So let's pop up the questions. So where would you be? Where would you be on an average Wednesday in summer? There's a poll there. Here we go. And thinking about last summer, would you have been prepared if you needed to spend a few nights away from your home in an emergency? So they're the two questions. Oh, there's a third question. Did you have an emergency kit packed with clothes, important documents, photos, medicines, and so on? Okay, so we'll let that go for another 30 seconds. Alrighty. Okay, so where would you be on an average Wednesday in summer? So slightly more than half, say, at work, and that's pretty normal. So I mean, lots of us leave early every day, even on ordinary days, and certainly on high risk days, because we've got to go to work. So that's part of it. Some people will be at home, and some person will be shopping. No one will be on holidays. Oh well. So thinking about last summer, would you have been prepared if you need to spend a few nights away from home? And about half people have said yes to that. And some people are either no or unsure. Did you have an emergency kit packed with clothes, important documents, photos, medicines, etc.? So about half and half there. So that's something to think about. As we head into summer, one of the things you need to think about is, you know, what are the sorts of things that you'd like to preserve in a bushfire? What are the things that, if it all goes completely rotten, are you going to miss? And so one of the things to think about is to actually gather all that stuff together, and you can fit all of these things into basically a couple of cardboard boxes and just move them off the hill for the duration of summer to either, you know, to a relative's house or a trusted friend's house, or you know, even into storage. So that's something to think about. But you probably need to have a kit that will help you survive for a few days if you have to relocate. So it's that initial period of relocation, even if nothing really bad happens, that's can be difficult for people. So there's just a thought. You know, have a think about well, if I need to leave because of high fire danger on any day, have I got somewhere to go, somewhere I can stay? So there's just a couple of things to think about. Okay, thank you. Okay. Let's keep going, Darren. Let's keep going. Okay, so we talk a lot about making a plan and being prepared. So know what you'll do, think ahead, make a plan before summer starts. So thinking in terms of, there's going to be a few days over summer where I might need to relocate. Now, you know, historically, there's tended to be not more than around 10 total fire ban days in the Dandenongs over summer periods. So that might be a trigger. There are fewer days of extreme when the fire weather reaches extreme. So you know, that's another trigger potentially. So think about what you do, where you would go before, and now is a good time to be thinking because we've got a bit of a breather. Stay informed, so that the big emergency app is really important. Prepare your property. So even if particularly if you're not going to be here, the more work you do around your property, the more chance it has of surviving. So good housekeeping around the property, cleaning up, will mean that it's got a better chance of surviving if there's a fire breaks out in the local area. Okay. What about COVID-19? So we're obviously still in a situation where COVID-19 is a factor. Can I still leave early? Yes. So if we were to go back for whatever, you know, heaven forbid that we go back into a lockdown situation, yes, you can still leave during an emergency. So you know, it'll be subject to the normal things like having to carry a mask and all that sort of thing. But COVID-19 will not mean you have to stay at home on days of extreme fire danger. You'll certainly be permitted to leave. Okay. So what happens if things go wrong and your plans fail? We saw from the radiant heat animation that sheltering behind solid objects may provide some protection. If we go back one slide, thanks, Taryn. Ooh, lost it. The sort of things you need to have if you are staying here, or for whatever reason you're stuck here, is you need to be covered up. So you need to be wearing adequate clothing, natural fibres, solid boots. Don't be that guy on the roof in thongs with the hose, because that's never a good thing. You need to be able to protect yourself from radiant heat. So we talked about radiant heat and its impact before. One of the ways you do this is by being properly dressed. So natural fibre clothes, hat, gloves, some sort of eye protection, so some sort of mask protection, not a paper mask. You'll need something a bit more solid than that. But we've all got masks now, cloth masks, so that's great. Here we go. Tough leather gloves, sturdy boots, wool or cotton socks. So if you're going to be stuck here, you should have a kit that has this sort of stuff in it ready to go. So in the event you are stuck here, this is the sort of gear you've got to hand. Okay. As we said, sheltering behind a solid object may provide some protection. Sheltering in a house will provide some protection. Okay, so there's some other options if things go wrong. So, and again, up here, it's pretty limited. So swimming pool, a dam, a river, neighbourhood safer place. There are no neighbourhood safer places in this part of the Dandenongs. And so that's not an option for us. You know, there aren't that many ploughed paddocks and reserve. We are, because of the nature of the landscape up here, we're quite constrained in the sorts of places that will offer us sanctuary, and that's why the advice is always to leave early and go down to the suburbs. So, but if you are stuck, these are the sorts of things. And if you're travelling in other parts of the state, these are the sorts of things you need to bear in mind as a last resort option. Mentioned stationary cars there. That's a really limited survival option. These days, because cars are no longer built out of steel, you've got to be, it will work in certain grassland areas, but certainly won't work anywhere in forest, because it's simply by the nature of the radiant heat that's given off by the fires. Okay. So there's some examples of neighbourhood safer places. And as you can see, they're not, you know, when they say safer place, it's often just a footy ground or a bit of beachside foreshore, or an open space in the middle of a town. So it's not an ideal option for sheltering in a bushfire, but it may be the difference between surviving and not when you're traveling. As I said, there aren't that many around here. So let's just go quickly to this little bit of video, or a little bit of not video, it's just still images. That's a bit of what it looks like during a bushfire, and the consequences that can flow from trying to drive through it. So try not to drive through fire. Heavy smoke makes it impossible to see, and I talked about that earlier, as we get a lot of smoke comes down around in the hills, and it makes it really hard to navigate where you're going. You know, you could get hit by a tree, as you can see in that fairly distressing picture at the top left-hand corner there. You run into another car because you can't see what you're doing. So sheltering a car is an incredibly risky thing to do. They're designed to get you from A to B, not to shelter in a bushfire from them. All right, so just finishing up here, take action, make a plan. So there's plenty of resources available through the CFA. So you can download resources off the CFA website. Think about the sort of things you want to do to plan and prepare your property and your survival. And so CFA runs a bunch of planning workshops to help you with that. And you can develop quite a specific little plan for your household that will help you survive bushfire. So that's a good thing. Download the Vic Emergency app. That's, you know, a really good source of information. It will constantly update you with what's going on. Connect with your local brigade and your community. Okay, so before we go to that poll, well, no, let's do the poll. Did this meeting give you some better understanding of bushfire in your local area? Okay, that's good. It's good. And would you recommend a family? You know, I guess one of the difficulties we're having at the moment is because we have to do this by Zoom or by using alternative technology until such time we can meet together in person again. And so that's got some limitations to it. And we saw a couple of those tonight where we had some technical problems. But thank you for those responses. And we'll just close that off now. Thanks very much. So that's great. All right. So finally, Captain Phil Skiller I think wants to say a couple of words. So over to you, Phil.
Thank you, John. First of all, I'd like to thank you, John, for presentation tonight. Very good. And your local knowledge is just amazing of what up here and the work you've done with Sassafras. We appreciate your help. Taryn, for helping out from CFA. Very good. It's been a really good night. Thank you very much. Just like to stress that if we have got something happening up here, if it's high fire danger, think about leaving and getting off early. Really, we can, as John said, we cannot get a truck to your door or to everybody's door. We'll get as many trucks up here as we can, as quick as we can, but that will take us time to do. So please think about leaving early. If you don't have a plan, get a plan. If you decide you're going to leave and it's after a fire has already started and you've got the smoke and you see the flames, it's probably too late to leave. And as you saw those cars, I'll never forget after Black Saturday driving up the slide in the fire truck and all the cars on the side of the road there. Reminder, it's too late to leave. So then you've got to act your plan about staying and what your plan is if you are going to stay, how you're going to get through it. So think about all these things. If you need assistance, Alyssa Jans is our community safety person and she does a fantastic job. She's around all the time. If you've got any questions, you can come and see us at the Fire Brigade on a Wednesday night or a Sunday morning or email comsafety@olindacfa.info and Alyssa will get back to you. She's got a wealth of knowledge. So please use our resources that we've got to assist you. And just finally, on behalf of the Olinda Police and the Olinda Rural Fire Brigade, all our members, we'd like to wish you all a safe and Merry Christmas. And let's hope we don't have any fires up here in the Dandenongs. Let's keep them nice. And thank you very much.
Thanks, Phil. And as I said before, Linda, like all our brigades around this part of the world, you know, really do a fantastic job of looking after the local communities. And there's heaps of information you can just drop in at the fire station when there are people there, which is usually on a Wednesday or a Sunday morning. And there'll be someone there who can give you some advice. So I think Tara and I will hang around for a bit. If you, there's some contact details there at the bottom of the screen, there. Tara and I are happy to hang around and answer some questions. So if you've got questions, you want to load them into the chat. We're happy, if you've got any specific things, we're happy to stick around, you know, for the next 15-20 minutes and answer questions. There's just another little information about, you know, there's some reasonably confronting things that have been shown tonight. If you've got issues that arise from those, then you know, there's people to talk to. So, okay, so that's about it from me. Thanks very much. I'm, as I said, happy to sit around and answer the chat. Thanks for coming.